I used to believe that 30 years of marriage meant something. That building a life together, brick by careful brick, created a foundation nothing could shake. I was wrong. Looking back now, I realize the cracks were there long before that rain-soaked Tuesday when my world imploded. My name is James Harrison, and at 58, I thought I had it all figured out. A successful construction company I'd built from the ground up, a sprawling colonial house in Connecticut's wealthy suburbs, and what I believed was a rock-solid marriage to Catherine, my college sweetheart. Our twin daughters had graduated college last year, launching their own lives in different cities. It was supposed to be our time now, Catherine's and mine. The first hint that something was off came during our weekly dinner with Marcus, my business partner of 15 years. He'd been acting strange lately, avoiding eye contact during our conversations about upcoming projects, his usual confident demeanor replaced by an awkward hesitancy. That evening, as Catherine served her signature roast beef, I caught a look between them. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but it sent a chill down my spine I couldn't explain. "The Richardson project is coming along nicely," Marcus said, pushing his food around his plate. "The foundation work should be done by next week." Catherine's hand trembled slightly as she poured more wine. "That's wonderful. You two have worked so hard on this development." I watched her carefully, noting how she hadn't touched her food. Over the past few months, she'd lost weight, claiming it was a new yoga routine. But something in her voice tonight seemed off, strained, like a wire pulled too tight. "We should celebrate," Marcus suggested, his eyes flickering to Catherine before quickly looking away. "Maybe dinner at the Carlton. They just got that new chef from New York." The Carlton. That's when another piece clicked into place. 3 weeks ago, I'd seen Catherine's credit card statement with a charge from there. When I'd asked about it, she'd mentioned meeting her sister Jennifer for lunch. But Jennifer had been in Europe that week, I remembered, because she'd sent us photos of her trip to Paris. The lies were starting to stack up, each one a brick in a wall I hadn't realized was being built between us. After dinner, as Marcus was leaving, I overheard a whispered conversation on the front porch. I couldn't make out the words, but the urgency in their tone made my stomach knot. When Catherine came back inside, her cheeks were flushed, and she immediately busied herself with the dishes. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my voice casual while my heart hammered against my ribs. "Of course," she replied too quickly, not turning to face me. "Marcus just wanted to discuss the charity gala next month. The company's donating again, right?" The charity gala. Another piece of the puzzle I hadn't realized I was solving. Last year's event photos had shown Catherine and Marcus dancing, his hand resting just a bit too low on her back. I dismissed it then, but now the image burned in my mind with new significance. That night, I lay awake, listening to Catherine's too even breathing beside me. My mind raced through years of memories, re-examining moments I'd taken for granted. The late-night work meetings. The new perfume she'd started wearing. The password she'd recently added to her phone. My company's IT guy, Kevin, had been trying to tell me something for weeks. He'd come to my office several times, fidgeting with reports about our server security, mentioning unusual email patterns he'd noticed. I'd brushed him off, too busy with project deadlines. Now I wondered what he'd found. The next morning, I called Kevin into my office first thing. His face was pale as he sat down, clutching his laptop like a shield. "Mr. Harrison," he started, then stopped, swallowing hard. "About those server logs I mentioned." I leaned forward, my hands gripping the edge of my desk. "Show me everything, Kevin." "And Kevin? Not a word to anyone about this. Especially not Marcus." As he opened his laptop, I could feel the foundation of my life starting to crack. But I'd built my company from nothing, weathered recessions and setbacks. I knew how to handle structural failure. The trick was to gather all the data before deciding whether to repair or demolish. What I didn't know then was that the evidence Kevin was about to show me would force me to question not just my marriage, but every relationship I'd built over the past 2 decades. And that was just the beginning of a story that would end with choices I never thought I'd have to make. The cursor blinked on Kevin's screen as he pulled up the first file, and I felt my jaw tighten. Whatever was coming, I was done being blind. It was time to see exactly how deep the cracks in my foundation went. The truth has a peculiar weight to it. As Kevin's trembling fingers navigated through folders of archived emails and server logs, each revelation landed like a stone in my gut, building a foundation of rage I never knew I was capable of harboring. The evidence sprawled across his laptop screen told a story I'd been too blind, or perhaps too trusting, to see. "They've been using a separate email server," Kevin explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "Private accounts, but they accessed them from company devices. The metadata, it shows thousands of exchanges over the past 18 months. 18 months. My mind raced back through that timeline, reconstructing memories with this new, toxic knowledge. Catherine's 45th birthday celebration at the Carlton. The company Christmas party where she'd worn that red dress. The business trip to Chicago where Marcus had insisted on handling negotiations personally. Each memory now twisted and corrupted, like photographs burned at the edges. "There's more," Kevin continued, pulling up a series of financial records. Large transfers from the company accounts to an offshore holding company. The paperwork looks legitimate at first glance, but I cross-referenced the dates. Each transfer coincides with our major project payments from clients. The realization hit me with the force of a sledgehammer. They weren't just betraying me emotionally, they were systematically dismantling everything I'd built. My marriage. My company. My legacy. The twin pillars of my life were being hollowed out from the inside, and I'd been too trusting to notice the decay. "Show me everything," I commanded, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "Every email, every transfer, every logged meeting. I want to know exactly how deep this rabbit hole goes." For the next 3 hours, I absorbed every detail. The secret rendezvous disguised as business meetings. The careful manipulation of project budgets to hide their theft. The intimate emails that made my stomach turn. But what struck me hardest was the calculated precision of their betrayal. This wasn't just an affair born of passion or weakness, it was a methodically planned destruction of my life. As the sun set outside my office window, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The kind of calm that comes when rage crystallizes into purpose. I'd spent 30 years building things, buildings, relationships, trust. Now, for the first time in my life, I would learn to destroy. "Kevin," I said, closing his laptop gently. "I need you to secure copies of everything. Store them somewhere safe, somewhere they can't be accessed or deleted. Can you do that?" He nodded, understanding the weight of what I was asking. "Mr. Harrison, there's one more thing." He hesitated, then pulled out a small USB drive. "I've been tracking their phones. They're meeting tonight at the Carlton. Room 512. The irony almost made me laugh. The Carlton, where Catherine and I had celebrated our 25th anniversary. Where I'd proposed to her all those years ago, young and full of dreams about our future. I stood at my office window, watching the city lights flicker to life in the gathering dusk. Behind me, Kevin quietly packed up his equipment, leaving the USB drive on my desk like a loaded gun. "Kevin," I called as he reached the door. "Thank you. And remember, not a word to anyone." Alone in my office, I plugged in the USB drive and began to plan. The evidence was overwhelming, but knowledge wasn't enough. I needed leverage, needed to understand every angle before I made my move. Catherine and Marcus thought they were playing chess while I was playing checkers. They were about to learn how wrong they were. My phone buzzed, a text from Catherine, "Working late tonight, honey. Don't wait up." Each word was a fresh betrayal, a knife twisted deeper into an already bleeding wound. I picked up my car keys, the weight of them familiar in my hand. The Carlton was a 15-minute drive away. Plenty of time to consider my next move. As I stepped into the elevator, I caught my reflection in the polished brass doors. The man staring back at me wasn't the trusting fool who'd walked into this office this morning. His eyes held something darker, something forged in the crucible of betrayal. I'd always told my daughters that character is revealed not in moments of comfort, but in moments of crisis. As I drove through the darkening streets toward the Carlton, I wondered what kind of man this crisis would reveal me to be. The thought should have troubled me more than it did. The hotel's familiar facade loomed ahead, its elegant windows glowing with warm light that now seemed to mock everything I'd believed about my life. I pulled into the parking structure, noting Marcus's Tesla parked in his preferred spot near the elevator. Even now, he couldn't resist his creatures of habit. As I sat in my car, engine cooling in the gathering darkness, I felt the weight of the USB drive in my pocket. In my mind, I could see them up there in room 512, comfortable in their deceit, never suspecting that their carefully constructed house of lies was about to come crashing down around them. The question wasn't whether to act, that decision had been made the moment Kevin showed me those emails. The question was how to dismantle their world with the same methodical precision they'd used to destroy mine. I reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found a number I hadn't used in years. Frank Russo, an old client who owed me more than a few favors. A man with connections that operated in the shadows of legality. As I pressed dial, I felt the last fragments of my old self falling away. The phone rang once, twice, and then a gruff voice answered. James. Been a long time. Frank, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. I need your help with something. Something that requires your particular expertise. The pieces were falling into place. Catherine and Marcus had taught me the true price of trust. Now it was time for them to learn the cost of betrayal. There's a particular kind of clarity that comes with absolute betrayal, a crystalline awareness that strips away every comfortable illusion you've built around your life. As I sat in my car outside the Carlton, watching the minutes tick past on the dashboard clock, I felt that clarity burning through me like acid, dissolving the man I used to be. Frank's words still echoed in my mind, remember, James, revenge is a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. You want them to bleed slowly, watching everything they built crumble around them, just like they did to you. I pulled out my phone and opened the tracking app Kevin had installed. 2 red dots pulsed on the screen, both in room 512. My wife and my business partner, thinking themselves safe in their fortress of lies. The thought almost made me laugh, how they'd mistaken my trust for weakness, my dedication for blindness. I've got people who can handle the financial angle, Frank had said. Wire transfers, offshore accounts, we can make it all disappear. But the question is, do you want to just hurt them, or do you want to destroy them? The answer had come to me with frightening ease, destruction. Complete and absolute. Not just their relationship, not just their finances, but the very foundation of who they believed themselves to be. I stepped out of my car, the evening air heavy with the promise of rain. The hotel's lobby welcomed me with its familiar warmth, a place where I'd celebrated countless business deals and anniversaries. Now it felt like walking into enemy territory, every luxury a mockery of my foolish trust. The elevator ride to the 5th floor was an exercise in controlled fury. My reflection in the mirrored walls showed a man I barely recognized, someone harder, colder, shaped by betrayal into something dangerous. The James Harrison who believed in second chances and redemption had died in my office hours ago, replaced by someone who understood that mercy was just another word for weakness. I didn't go to room 512. Not yet. Instead, I made my way to the hotel bar, ordering a scotch I had no intention of drinking. My phone buzzed, a message from Frank, everything's in place. Your call. The plan we'd constructed was elegant in its simplicity. While Catherine and Marcus thought themselves safe in their illicit rendezvous, Frank's team was already dismantling their careful schemes. By morning, those offshore accounts would be empty, their paper trail leading directly back to Marcus's personal accounts. The evidence of embezzlement would be impossible to ignore, impossible to explain away. But that was just the beginning. The real devastation would come from what I'd discovered in those emails, the ones they thought were safely deleted. Plans not just to steal from me, but to force me out of my own company. Conversations about how they'd use my daughter's trust funds as leverage. The casual cruelty of their plotting laid bare in their own words. My phone buzzed again. Catherine, this time, lots of paperwork tonight. Don't wait up. Each word a fresh lie, each message a new brick in the wall of evidence I was building. I smiled, remembering something my father once told me, son, when you build something, make damn sure the foundation is solid. Because if it isn't, everything above it will eventually come crashing down. Well, they'd built their affair on a foundation of lies, and now those lies were about to crumble beneath them. I took out my phone and composed a message to Marcus, emergency at the Richardson site. Need you there now. I watched the dots on my tracking app, waiting for movement. 5 minutes passed. 10. Finally, Marcus's dot began to move, heading for the elevator. Perfect. Let him rush to a non-existent crisis while I had a long overdue conversation with my wife. As I stood, straightening my jacket, I caught sight of myself in the bar's mirrored wall. The man reflected there wasn't just angry, he was transformed. Like metal heated and reforged, betrayal had burned away everything soft and trusting, leaving behind something harder, something capable of delivering the kind of justice that wouldn't be found in any courtroom. The elevator dinged, and I glimpsed Marcus hurrying through the lobby, his shirt poorly tucked in, tie askew. He didn't notice me in the bar. He was too focused on protecting his investment, rushing to prevent a crisis that didn't exist. I waited 5 more minutes, then took out my keycard, the master key I'd obtained through one of Frank's connections. It had cost a small fortune, but watching the light turn green on room 512's door would be worth every penny. My hand on the door handle, I paused, feeling the weight of the moment. On the other side of this door was the end of my marriage, the death of 30 years of trust and shared dreams. But it was also the beginning of something else, my revenge, carefully plotted and meticulously executed. I thought of my daughters, of the trust funds Catherine and Marcus had planned to plunder. Of the life they'd tried to steal from me. Of every lie, every betrayal, every calculated moment of deception. The handle turned silently under my grip. In the moment before I pushed the door open, I felt something shift inside me, the last remnant of the man who believed in forgiveness falling away, replaced by someone who understood that some betrayals demand retribution. The door swung open silently, and I stepped into the room, ready to begin the dismantling of everything they held dear. What I saw there changed everything, not just my plans for revenge, but my understanding of just how deep betrayal could go. They say that in the moment before drowning, your entire life flashes before your eyes. Standing in the doorway of room 512, I experienced something similar, but instead of my life, I watched the elaborate facade of my reality dissolve like a watercolor in the rain. The scene before me wasn't just another layer of betrayal, it was a complete reimagining of everything I thought I understood about my world. Catherine wasn't alone. But it wasn't just another clandestine meeting with Marcus. No, the truth was far more insidious. Seated around the room's elegant dining table were 3 other faces I recognized instantly: Jennifer, Catherine's supposedly Europe-bound sister, Michael Chen, our company's biggest investor, and Judge William Morris, who'd presided over several major zoning cases for our developments. The moment crystallized in my mind like a photograph negative: Catherine in her work clothes, papers spread across the table, glasses of wine half emptied. Their faces transformed from relaxed conspiracy to shocked recognition as I stood in the doorway, the master key still cold in my hand. James. Catherine's voice carried none of its usual warmth. Instead, I heard something I'd never detected before: a steel edge that spoke of boardrooms and power plays rather than the comfortable domesticity we'd supposedly shared. "You're early." The absurdity of her statement hit me like a physical blow. Early? For what? The systematic destruction of my life. The complete dismantling of everything I'd built. "Please, come in," Michael Chen said smoothly, gesturing to an empty chair. "We were just discussing the future of Harrison Construction." The future. My future. Their words from the stolen emails suddenly took on new meaning. This wasn't just an affair with Marcus. This was a coup, meticulously planned and expertly orchestrated. Every betrayal I discovered was just a single thread in a far larger tapestry of deception. I stepped into the room, closing the door behind me with deliberate care. The click of the latch felt like the sound of a jail cell closing, though who was the prisoner and who was the jailer remained to be seen. "How long?" My voice emerged surprisingly steady, belying the hurricane of rage and revelation churning inside me. "Does it matter?" Catherine's response was cool, professional. This was the real her, I realized, the woman behind the mask of my loving wife. A stranger wearing familiar skin. "You were never meant to find out this way, James. We had a timeline, a plan to ease you into retirement. Comfortable, generous even. Your legacy would have remained intact." My legacy? The laugh that escaped me sounded foreign to my own ears. "You mean the company I built from nothing? The reputation I spent 30 years establishing? The family I thought I had?" Jennifer, my supposed sister-in-law, had the grace to look uncomfortable, but Judge Morris merely sipped his wine, watching the scene unfold with the detached interest of someone observing a mildly entertaining play. "You're a builder, James," Catherine continued, her voice taking on that patronizing tone she'd used when explaining why I needed to upgrade my wardrobe. "You're excellent at it. But the company needs to evolve. The industry is changing. We need different leadership for different times." As she spoke, I felt the weight of the USB drive in my pocket, thought of Frank's team currently dismantling their offshore accounts, remembered Kevin's meticulous documentation of every email, every transaction, every betrayal. They thought they were springing their trap, never realizing they'd already lost their advantage. "Different leadership," I repeated slowly, pulling out my phone. "Like Marcus? Is that why you sent him running to a non-existent crisis at the Richardson site?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed Catherine's face, the first crack in her carefully maintained facade. Judge Morris set down his wine glass, suddenly more attentive. "You see," I continued, my thumb hovering over the screen, "while you were all here planning my comfortable retirement, I was making some plans of my own. Would you like to know what those plans entail?" The room's atmosphere shifted perceptibly, like the air pressure changed before a storm. Michael Chen's hand tightened around his pen, and Jennifer's face lost what little color it had retained. "James," Catherine started, but I cut her off with a gesture. "No, Catherine. For once, you're going to listen. Because what happens in the next 5 minutes will determine not just my future, but all of yours as well. And trust me, you'll want to hear what I have to say." I pulled out a chair and sat down, placing my phone on the table like a loaded gun. The evidence I had, combined with Frank's connections, could destroy everyone in this room. But looking at their faces, these people who'd plotted my downfall while smiling at my dinner table, I realized that simple destruction wouldn't be enough. No, they deserved something more elegant. Something that would make them understand the true price of betrayal. I smiled, and watched as uncertainty crept into their eyes. They thought they knew me, the trusting fool, the craftsman more comfortable with blueprints than boardroom politics. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. "Now," I said, leaning forward, "let's talk about the real future of Harrison Construction. There's an art to watching people's worlds unravel, a peculiar satisfaction in observing the precise moment when confidence crumbles into uncertainty, when power dissolves into desperate bargaining." Sitting at that elegant table in room 512, I savored each micro-expression that crossed their faces as I laid out my counterplay. First, I said, my voice carrying the weight of calculated certainty, let's discuss the offshore accounts. The ones that, as of 20 minutes ago, no longer exist. I turned to Michael Chen, watching his carefully maintained composure fracture. Fascinating how those transfers corresponded exactly with our major project payments. The SEC would find that particularly interesting, wouldn't they, Michael? The silence in the room took on a physical presence, heavy with the death of long-laid plans. Catherine's face had lost its professional mask, revealing something I'd never seen before, fear. Real, visceral fear that transformed her familiar features into those of a stranger. You don't understand what you're doing, James, she said, but her voice had lost its patronizing edge. The arrangements we made, the connections we've built. The bribes you've paid. I interrupted, shifting my gaze to Judge Morris. The zoning miracles that suddenly went our way. I have to admit, William, you were thorough in covering your tracks. But emails never really disappear, do they? They just wait in server archives, like time bombs waiting to detonate. Judge Morris's judicial composure cracked, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. These are serious allegations, James. Without proof. Proof. The laugh that escaped me carried decades of accumulated trust, now transformed into a weapon. Like the proof of every private meeting in this hotel. Every transfer. Every conversation where you planned my comfortable retirement. I pulled out the USB drive, letting it catch the light. Amazing what people will reveal when they think they're speaking in confidence. Jennifer, my fake sister-in-law, started to rise, but I silenced her with a look. Sit down, Jennifer. We haven't even discussed your role yet, how you helped launder money through your European travel business. Those photos from Paris were beautiful, by the way. Excellent Photoshop work. The room's atmosphere had transformed, power shifting like mercury in a broken thermometer. These people, who had plotted my destruction over wine and conspiracies, were beginning to understand the true depth of their miscalculation. What do you want? Michael Chen's question cut through the tension, pragmatic even in crisis. A true businessman, always looking for the next deal. I leaned back, feeling the weight of my next words. Want? I want you to understand something fundamental about betrayal. It's not just an action, it's an education. You've taught me that trust is merely camouflage for ambition, that family is just another word for convenient alliance. I stood, pacing slowly around the table, watching each of them track my movement like prey following a predator. But here's what you failed to consider, you taught these lessons to a man who builds things for a living. A man who understands that before you can build something new, you sometimes need to demolish what's standing in the way. Reaching into my jacket, I withdrew a series of documents, copies of everything Frank's team had gathered. I placed a folder in front of each of them, watching their faces as they processed the depth of their exposure. Inside these folders, you'll find two things: evidence of everything you've done, and a way forward. A choice, if you will. Because unlike you, I believe in giving people options, even if they don't deserve them. Catherine opened her folder with trembling hands, her face draining of color as she scanned the contents. James, this would destroy everything. Yes, I cut her off, it would. Your reputation, your freedom, your carefully constructed futures, all of it gone. Unless. Unless what? Judge Morris's voice had lost its judicial authority, replaced by the desperate tone of a man glimpsing his own destruction. I smiled, remembering something my father once told me about power: real power isn't in what you do, but in what you could do. Unless you follow my instructions. Exactly. Without deviation. The next hour unfolded like a symphony of capitulation. Each person in that room, who had thought themselves so clever in their betrayal, now understood they were merely players in a game whose rules I had rewritten. Their choices weren't choices at all, they were carefully constructed paths, each leading to a form of penance I had designed. As I laid out their roles in what was to come, I caught Catherine watching me with something like recognition, as if she was finally seeing me for the first time. Not as the trusting husband she had betrayed, but as someone capable of orchestrating a revenge so complete it bordered on art. But even as I wove my web of retribution around them, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a warning. In becoming the architect of their destruction, what was I becoming myself? The answer to that question would have to wait. There was still one piece of my plan yet to be revealed, one final move that would make all of this worthwhile. And it involved Marcus, still frantically searching for a crisis that didn't exist at the Richardson site. I checked my watch, allowing myself a small smile. It was time for the endgame to begin. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but no one tells you about the frost that forms inside you while you're waiting to serve it. Standing in my office the next morning, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of amber and gold, I felt that internal chill crystallizing into something permanent, a glacial core where warmth and trust once resided. Marcus burst through my door exactly as I knew he would, his designer suit wrinkled from a sleepless night, his face etched with the desperate lines of a man watching his carefully constructed world implode. The Richardson site crisis had kept him running in circles until dawn, each frantic call meeting only silence, each emergency contact mysteriously unavailable. "James," he started, his voice hoarse from hours of futile phone calls. "About last night." "Sit down, Marcus." My voice carried none of the friendship we'd built over 15 years, none of the trust I'd foolishly invested in his loyalty. "We need to discuss the future of Harrison Construction." The blood drained from his face as he noticed the folders spread across my desk, copies of every damning email, every fraudulent transfer, every betrayal meticulously documented and annotated. But it was the presence of Michael Chen and Judge Morris, seated silently in the corner of my office, that truly shattered his composure. "I don't understand," he stammered, his eyes darting between faces that should have been allies but now wore the hollow expressions of the defeated. "What is this? Understanding comes in stages, doesn't it?" I moved to the window, watching my reflection overlay the city below. First, there's the shock of revelation, that moment when the first crack appears in your perfect plan. Then comes denial, bargaining, and finally, submission to the inevitable. I turned back to face him, noting how he seemed to shrink in his expensive chair. "Your co-conspirators have already made their choice, Marcus. Now it's your turn." The next hour unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of destruction. Each piece of evidence I presented stripped away another layer of his defenses, each revelation pushed him further into the corner I'd constructed. The offshore accounts, empty. The secret emails, exposed. The careful alliance he'd built with my wife and the others, shattered. "But why?" he finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why not just turn us in? You have enough evidence to destroy us all." A cold smile crossed my lips as I leaned forward. "Because prison is too simple, too clean. I want you to live with what you've done, to wake up every morning and face the consequences of your choices. Your freedom is your punishment." I slid a final document across the desk, a new contract that would reshape the future of Harrison Construction. Not the hostile takeover they'd planned, but something far more insidious. They would remain in their positions, maintain their public faces, but under terms that would slowly, inexorably drain their power and wealth. "Sign it," I said simply. "Or don't. But remember, everything you've built, everything you've stolen, everything you are rests on this choice." One by one, they signed. Each signature was a victory, but one that tasted like ashes in my mouth. I'd won, yes, but at what cost to my own humanity? Later that evening, I stood in my empty house. Catherine had moved out hours earlier, taking with her only what she'd brought into our marriage. 30 years of shared life reduced to empty closets and hollow rooms. The silence should have been deafening, but instead it felt like a cleansing wind, sweeping away the last remnants of who I used to be. My phone buzzed, a message from Frank, "It's done. They're all locked in. No way out." I poured myself a scotch, the same brand Catherine and I had shared on our wedding day. The liquid caught the dying light, amber turning to blood in the sunset's glow. In that moment, I finally understood the true price of trust, not just its loss, but the transformation its betrayal demands. The man who had believed in love, in loyalty, in the unshakable bonds of family and friendship was gone. In his place stood someone harder, colder, forged in a crucible of betrayal into something both more and less than human. I raised my glass to my reflection in the window, toasting the death of the man I was and the birth of the man betrayal had created. The scotch burned going down, but the ice inside me remained unmelted, eternal. They say living well is the best revenge. They're wrong. The best revenge is making them live with what they've done, watching them suffocate slowly in the web of their own choices. And as I stood there, watching night claim the city, I felt a strange peace settle over me. Let them keep their positions, their public faces, their illusion of victory. Every morning they would wake to the knowledge that their freedom was my mercy, their wealth my allowance, their very existence a daily reminder of their complete and total defeat. Some would call it cruel. Perhaps it was. But betrayal teaches its own lessons, and I had learned them well. In the end, trust isn't just about faith, it's about power. And I would never relinquish that power again. The sun set on the empire I'd built, now transformed by betrayal into something darker, more complex. But as darkness claimed the sky, I smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring a new kind of dawn. After all, I was a builder. And from the ashes of trust, I had built something far more lasting, a monument to the price of betrayal, carved in ice and steel.